Eleanor's fingers were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the champagne glass. She set it down before anyone noticed, but someone already had. From across the garden, a man she'd never met was watching her like he knew every secret she carried, every debt, every lie, every sleepless night. She was a ghost at this wedding, and ghosts weren't supposed to be seen. But when the Marquis of Ashworth leaned close and whispered, "Pretend you're my bride," Eleanor realized something terrifying. Being invisible was no longer her biggest problem. Before we begin, if you love stories about second chances, impossible love, and the courage to start over, subscribe to this channel and follow Eleanor's journey to the very end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The gloves didn't fit right. That was the first thing Eleanor noticed as she stood outside the chapel doors, watching her younger sister walk toward the altar. The silk was too tight across her knuckles, pinching the skin between her fingers, and she kept flexing her hands like she could stretch the fabric into something comfortable. She couldn't. Nothing fit right anymore. Not the gloves, not the charcoal gray dress she'd chosen because it was the only thing in her closet that wasn't black. Not the smile she'd practiced in the mirror that morning until her cheeks ached. 6 months since James died. 6 months, and Eleanor Graves was still caught somewhere between mourning and living. Between the woman she'd been and whoever she was supposed to become next. "Poor thing," someone whispered behind a lace fan. "Still showing up to things. You'd think she'd have the decency to stay home." Eleanor's spine went straight. She didn't turn around. She'd learned that trick early. If you don't acknowledge the whisper, you can pretend you didn't hear it. You can pretend it doesn't feel like a knife sliding between your ribs. "She looks thin," another voice added. "I heard she's been selling furniture. Can you imagine?" Yes, Eleanor could imagine. She'd sold the dining table last month. The one James had bought when they were first married, when everything was still promises and laughter, and the belief that love was enough to build a life on. It wasn't. She moved through the garden toward the reception, keeping her head high and her expression neutral. The ceremony was over. Her sister Lydia had married well, a banker's son with good teeth and a steady income. Everything Eleanor's marriage had not been. "Eleanor!" Lydia appeared in a cloud of white lace, flushed with happiness. "You came!" "Of course I came. You're my sister." Lydia's smile faltered. "I wasn't sure. After everything. Mother said you might not feel up to it." "Mother says a lot of things. She means well. She means for me to disappear quietly. There's a difference." Lydia's eyes went soft with pity, and that was worse than the whispers. Pity from strangers Eleanor could endure. Pity from her own sister made her want to scream. "I'm fine, Lydia. Go enjoy your day." "Promise me you'll eat something. You look—" "I said I'm fine." Lydia hesitated, then squeezed Eleanor's hand and floated back toward her new husband. Eleanor watched her go and felt something complicated. Happiness for Lydia, yes, but underneath it, a grief so sharp it took her breath away. Not grief for James, not anymore. Grief for the version of herself who'd once stood in a white dress and believed that marriage meant safety. That love meant someone would catch you when you fell. Nobody caught Eleanor when she fell. She drifted toward the edge of the garden, away from the dancing and the champagne and the congratulations. There was a stone bench near the hedgerow, half hidden by climbing roses, and she aimed for it like a drowning woman swimming for shore. She didn't make it. "Miss Graves." The voice came from her left, low, precise, and carrying the kind of authority that expected obedience without raising its volume. Eleanor stopped walking. She turned. The Marquis of Ashworth stood 3 feet away, hands clasped behind his back, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. She knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. Lord Sebastian Hale was the kind of man who entered a room and rearranged its gravity. Tall, dark hair pushed back from a face that was too angular to be classically handsome, but impossible to look away from. Eyes the color of winter sky, pale gray, almost silver, and absolutely unforgiving. "Your Grace." She dropped into a curtsy, which felt absurd given that they'd never been introduced. Protocol demanded she wait for a mutual acquaintance to make introductions. Protocol also demanded she not attend her sister's wedding looking like she'd crawled out of a crypt. And yet, here she was. "Walk with me," he said. Excuse me?" "Walk with me, now, before George Graves reaches you." Eleanor's blood went cold. She glanced over her shoulder. Sure enough, George was cutting through the crowd. James's older brother, her brother-in-law, the man who'd spent the last 6 months circling her like something patient and hungry. He was smiling. He always smiled. It never reached his eyes. "How do you know about George?" Eleanor asked. "Walk, Miss Graves. I'll explain while we move." His hand was already at her elbow, guiding her away from the reception with the casual certainty of someone who'd never been told no. Eleanor's instinct was to resist. She'd had enough of men steering her. But something in his grip was different. Not possessive. Protective. She let him lead. They moved along the garden path, away from the music and the laughter, toward a section of the grounds where wisteria hung heavy over iron archways. "You're wondering why a stranger is dragging you away from your sister's wedding," Sebastian said. "The thought occurred to me." "How much do you owe?" Eleanor stopped walking. "What?" "Your late husband's debts." "How much?" Heat flooded her face. "That is absolutely none of your £3,000, give or take." He said it the way someone might report the weather. Matter of fact, unassailable. "Your husband gambled heavily in his final year. Lost most of it at cards, some at the races. He borrowed from men who don't write polite letters when payments are late. Since his death, those debts have fallen to you, and his brother George has been offering to settle them, if you'll sign over the house and vanish to some cottage in the countryside, where you'll never embarrass the family again." Eleanor couldn't breathe. The precision of it, every detail correct, every humiliation laid bare, by a man she'd never spoken to, made her feel stripped naked in broad daylight. "How?" she managed. "How do you know all of that?" "Because I make it my business to know things. And because George Graves has been telling anyone who'll listen. He wants you discredited, Eleanor. A desperate widow clinging to property that isn't rightfully hers. That's the story he's selling." "It is rightfully mine. James left the house to me." "James left you a house with a mortgage he couldn't pay and debts that will consume whatever equity remains. George knows that. He's counting on it. He wants you to reach the breaking point, where signing everything over feels like relief instead of surrender." The accuracy of it hit Eleanor like a physical blow, because she had been reaching that point. Last week, standing in her empty dining room, where the table used to be, she'd almost picked up the pen. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Why do you care?" "Because I need something from you." His eyes met hers, and Eleanor saw something she didn't expect beneath that commanding exterior. Not pity, not calculation, something almost desperate. "And you need protection," he continued. "So we're going to help each other." "How?" "Pretend you're my bride." The words hung between them like something detonated. Eleanor heard herself laugh, sharp, involuntary, the kind of sound that comes out when your brain can't process what your ears just received. "You've lost your mind." Not yet, though my mother's matchmaking efforts are bringing me close. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. She's arranged a summer house party at my estate. 6 eligible women. 6 weeks of forced courtship. 6 chances for my mother to hand-select my future wife, like she's choosing drapes. That sounds like your problem, not mine. It becomes your problem when I offer you £20,000 to solve it. Eleanor's heart stopped. £20,000. That wasn't just debt clearance. That was freedom. That was a life rebuilt from scratch, beholden to no one. You can't be serious, she said. I'm always serious. It's one of my many personality defects. He glanced back toward the wedding party. George was still searching the crowd, his expression darkening. Here's what I'm proposing. We announce an engagement tonight. You come to Ashworth Hall for the summer as my fiancé. You help me discourage my mother's candidates. At the end of the season, we part amicably. You keep the settlement, I keep my sanity. Everyone wins. Except the 6 women your mother invited. They'll survive the disappointment. They have trust funds to cushion the blow. Eleanor shook her head. This is insane. This is practical. You don't know me. I could be a terrible person. You sold your dining table before you sold your wedding ring. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Eleanor looked down at her left hand. The thin gold band was still there, not because she was sentimental about James, but because it was the last thing of value she owned, and she'd been saving it for when the situation became truly desperate. She hadn't realized anyone was paying that kind of attention. Why me? She asked. You could hire an actress. You could find someone more suitable. Sebastian's expression shifted. Something raw crossed his face, there and gone so fast, she almost missed it. Because you're the only woman at this wedding who looks like she'd rather be anywhere else. Because you won't actually want to marry me at the end of this, which makes you safe. And because... He paused. Because you looked at me just now like I might be a real person, instead of a title and a bank account. Do you know how rare that is? Something in Eleanor's chest cracked open. This powerful, untouchable man, the kind who moved through society like a force of nature, was standing in front of her and admitting to loneliness. She recognized it immediately. She'd been wearing the same expression for 6 months. If I say yes, she said slowly, what exactly does this involve? Public appearances. Enough affection to be believable. You'd have your own rooms at Ashworth Hall, your own privacy, your own freedom. All I ask is that you help me survive 6 weeks of my mother's manipulation and look convincingly devoted when people are watching. And when people aren't watching? Then we're just 2 people who made a deal. Honest. Direct. No performance required. Eleanor thought of George and his vulture patience. Of the landlord's letters she'd stopped opening. Of the way people looked through her now, like she'd become transparent. One condition, she said. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. When we end the engagement, you tell people I wasn't suitable, that I'm too marked by grief and debt to be a proper marchioness. I won't have you taking the blame for a breakup when I'm the one with nothing to lose. Something flickered across his face. Respect, maybe. Or surprise. You'd rather be seen as damaged goods than let me look fickle? I'm already seen as damaged goods, Your Grace. At least this way, the damage serves a purpose. It was the wrong thing to say. She saw it in the way his expression tightened, in the way his hand at her elbow became almost protective, like he was shielding her from her own self-deprecation. We agree on one thing, then, he said quietly. You believe you have nothing to lose. So take the risk, Miss Graves. Let me help you. Eleanor looked back toward the wedding. George had spotted them now and was moving in their direction, his smile sharpening. She thought about her empty house, her sold furniture, the ring on her finger that was worth maybe £50, 2 months' rent if she was lucky. She thought about £20,000 and the word freedom. "Yes," she whispered. Sebastian's shoulders dropped, barely visible, but she caught it. He'd been holding his breath. "Then let me do this properly." He raised his voice, not shouting, just projecting with a kind of authority that made people stop and listen. And Eleanor realized with a jolt of panic that they'd gathered an audience. Half the wedding party had drifted close enough to hear, their curiosity barely hidden behind champagne flutes and folded programs. "Miss Graves," Sebastian's voice carried across the garden, resonant and warm, and somehow tender. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The garden went silent. Every head turned. Every conversation died. Eleanor felt the weight of 100 stares pressing against her skin like physical contact. George stopped walking, his face drained of color. "Yes," Eleanor said. Her voice was clear, steady, stronger than she felt. "I will." Sebastian smiled, not the controlled expression she'd seen before. A real smile, one that reached his pale eyes and transformed his severe face into something devastating. "Thank you," he murmured, low enough for only her ears. Then louder. "You've made me the happiest man in England." He raised her gloved hand to his lips. The kiss was proper, barely a brush of his mouth against silk, but Eleanor felt it travel through her entire body. Like a brand, like a warning. The garden erupted. Gasps, whispers, poorly concealed shock mixing with grudging congratulations. Eleanor saw her mother's mouth fall open, saw Lydia clutch her new husband's arm, saw George Graves standing frozen in the crowd, his expression twisting from disbelief into something ugly and promising. And then she saw another woman, older, elegant, formidable, cutting through the crowd toward them with the precision of a warship. "That's my mother," Sebastian said under his breath. "Brace yourself." Lady Ashworth, the Dowager Marchioness, arrived like a weather system. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in midnight blue, with the same pale gray eyes as her son. She looked at Eleanor the way a scientist might examine an unexpected specimen, with clinical detachment and faint distaste. "Sebastian," she said, "how unexpected." "Mother, allow me to introduce my fiancée, Miss Eleanor Graves." The dowager's gaze moved to Eleanor. 3 seconds. That's all it took. 3 seconds of silent evaluation, and Eleanor felt herself measured, catalogued, and filed under insufficient. "I see," the dowager said. "And how long have you been acquainted?" "Long enough to know my own heart," Sebastian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I trust you'll welcome Eleanor to the family." It was a command disguised as courtesy. Everyone heard it. The dowager's mouth thinned. "Of course." She turned to Eleanor with a smile that could have chilled wine. "My dear, you must be overwhelmed. We'll have so much to discuss at Ashworth Hall." The threat was elegant. The promise of interrogation dressed up as hospitality. "I look forward to it, Your Grace," Eleanor said, matching the dowager's composure. As Lady Ashworth moved away, already collecting whispers and allies, Sebastian leaned close. "Don't look forward to any of it," he muttered. "My mother makes chess grandmasters look impulsive." "I noticed. You also just made 7 enemies. 6 women waiting at Ashworth Hall who expected my undivided attention this summer, plus my mother, Who planned the entire campaign? 7 enemies and 1 reluctant ally? 1 extremely committed ally, Sebastian corrected. I protect my investments. Is that what I am? An investment? He looked at her. Something complicated moved behind those winter-gray eyes. Ask me again at the end of summer. George appeared before Eleanor could respond. He'd recovered his composure, outwardly at least, but his eyes were wild. Eleanor, what is this? An engagement, George. Surely you've seen one before. This is ridiculous. You barely know this man. You're still in mourning. Half mourning, Eleanor corrected. And my personal life is no longer your concern. No longer my... Eleanor, I've spent 6 months trying to help you, trying to settle James's debts, to protect you from... From what? The debts you've been using as leverage to take my house? Eleanor's voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. I know what you've been doing, George. The visits, the pressure, the suggestions that I'd be better off signing everything over and disappearing. George's face went red. I was trying to help. You were trying to profit. There's a difference. And this Duke, Marquess, Sebastian corrected mildly. This Marquess suddenly wants to marry a penniless widow drowning in her dead husband's debts? You expect anyone to believe that? Sebastian stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone seemed to reduce George by several inches. What I expect, Sebastian said, is that you'll leave my fiancée alone. No more visits to her home. No more conversations about debts or property. No more contact of any kind. Are we clear? You can't. I can, and I will. If you test that boundary, Mr. Graves, you'll discover that my resources for making people miserable are considerably larger than yours. George looked between them. Eleanor's quiet defiance, Sebastian's cold authority, and something in his expression shifted. Calculation replacing rage. This wasn't over. Eleanor could see him filing this away, regrouping, planning his next move. You're making a mistake, Eleanor, he said. Both of you are. He turned and walked away. Eleanor let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. He'll be back, she said. Of course he will. Men like George don't surrender. They reposition. Sebastian offered his arm. But that's a problem for another day. Right now, we have a performance to complete. They walked back toward the wedding party together. Eleanor was aware of every eye on them, every whisper, every calculation happening behind polite smiles. She caught her reflection in a garden window and barely recognized herself. She didn't look happy exactly, but she looked present, visible, like she'd been pulled back from some invisible edge and given a reason to stand on solid ground. We leave for Ashworth Hall in 3 days, Sebastian said. Pack light. New wardrobes will be arranged when we arrive. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's costuming. If we're performing an engagement, you need the right wardrobe. He paused. And Eleanor, stop calling me Your Grace. If we're to be convincing, use my name. Sebastian. She tested it. The name felt strange in her mouth. Intimate. More intimate than the fake engagement somehow. What happens if no one believes us? She asked. He looked at her, really looked, with those pale eyes that seemed to see everything she was trying to hide. Then we fail together. But I don't intend to fail, Eleanor, and neither, I think, do you. He was right. She'd already lost everything once. She wasn't going to lose again. Even if winning meant pretending to love a man she'd met 20 minutes ago. Even if something in the way he said her name made her wonder if pretending would be harder or easier than she expected. 3 days later, Eleanor sat in a carriage more luxurious than any room she'd lived in. velvet seats, brass fixtures, windows wide enough to frame the English countryside like a painting. Sebastian sat across from her, working through correspondence with the focused efficiency of a man who managed a small empire. Which, Eleanor supposed, he did. 3 days. That's all it had taken to dismantle her old life and step into this new one. 3 days of hasty preparations, shocked acquaintances, and George Graves's barely controlled fury. He'd come to her boarding house the morning after the announcement, blocked the doorway. All false concern and transparent manipulation. "You're being used," he'd said. "Everyone sees it. A widow with nothing, and suddenly a marquess wants her? It's laughable, Eleanor. Whatever he's promised you, it won't last." "Maybe not," Eleanor had replied, "but it'll last longer than your patience, and that's enough for now." George had left, but not before promising that this, her elevation he meant, though the word he used was humiliation, would be temporary. Now the boarding house was behind her, and Ashworth Hall was ahead. And Eleanor was trying very hard not to feel like an actress who'd wandered onto the wrong stage. "You're nervous," Sebastian said, without looking up from his letters. "Would you believe me if I said no?" Not remotely. He set the correspondence aside, giving her his full attention. It was more unnerving than his distraction. "You should be nervous. You're about to walk into a house full of people who will despise you on sight." "How encouraging." "I prefer honesty to comfort." He leaned back. "My mother arrived yesterday with her 6 candidates. They were supposed to have 6 weeks of my undivided attention. Instead, they're attending a house party where they'll watch me be devoted to someone else. They will not be kind." "Tell me about them." "Know your enemy?" "Something like that." Sebastian's expression shifted to something almost amused. "Lady Rosalind Blackwell leads them. Beautiful, ambitious, utterly convinced that becoming a marchioness is her destiny. She'll attack your dignity." Noted. Lady Cordelia Marsh is subtler. She'll befriend you first, learn your weaknesses, then use them. Classic. Miss Penelope Whitmore is young and romantic. She'll cry, loudly, often. It's surprisingly effective as a tactic. And the others? Miss Helena Crawford is sharp with numbers. She'll try to prove mathematically that you're a fortune hunter. Lady Anne Selborne has political connections that could complicate your life considerably. And Miss Iris Graves. Graves? Eleanor interrupted. Like me? Distant relation to James's family, apparently. My mother thought it would be charming. Iris will use that connection to frame you as a social climber, trading on family shame. 6 women. 6 elegant, accomplished, furious women who'd expected to compete for a marquess and instead found him already claimed. "And your mother?" Eleanor asked. Sebastian's face went carefully blank. "My mother is grieving." "Grieving?" "My father died 2 years ago. She believes finding me a suitable wife is the last promise she owes him. She's convinced that if she introduces me to the right woman, I'll finally move on from—" He stopped. The silence was louder than words. "Move on from what?" Eleanor asked quietly. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that she'll see you as an obstacle to my happiness, not its source." There was something in his voice, something raw, quickly buried. Eleanor wanted to press. She didn't. Whatever wound he was protecting, it wasn't hers to unwrap. Not yet. "I'm not sure I can do this," she admitted. "Pretend to be in love convincingly enough to fool everyone, while 6 women actively try to destroy me." "You don't have to fool everyone," Sebastian leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You just have to convince them that I'm convinced, that I chose you despite all logic, despite every reason not to, that I'm—" He paused. that I'm too far gone to be saved. The way he said it, like he was giving her permission to be his undoing, made Eleanor's chest tighten. "How do I do that?" she whispered. "Let me court you," Sebastian said simply. "Not as a performance. Properly. Let me show you Ashworth Hall, introduce you to my world, treat you like someone I'm genuinely trying to win. And you respond honestly, even if that honesty is confusion or discomfort or fear. Real reactions always look more convincing than acting." It was brilliant. Instead of performing roles, they'd just be honest about the strangeness of what they were doing. The confusion would look like attraction. The awkwardness would look like new love finding its footing. "And if I start to genuinely dislike you?" Eleanor asked. "If you're terrible to live with?" Sebastian's smile was brief but real. "Then it'll be the most convincing engagement in history. Nobody doubts a couple that fights." The carriage slowed. Eleanor looked out the window and felt every thought in her head go quiet. Ashworth Hall rose from the landscape like something that had always been there, not built, but grown. Pale stone, warm in the afternoon sun. Windows that caught the light like watching eyes. Wings and towers and chimneys creating a silhouette that spoke of centuries. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. "Oh," Eleanor breathed. "Overwhelming?" Sebastian asked. "Terrifying." "Good. At least you're honest." He gathered his papers. "Remember, Eleanor, you belong here because I want you here. Anyone who questions that answers to me." The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. Sebastian stepped out first, then turned to offer his hand. Eleanor took it. Her fingers trembled in his grip, and she knew he felt it. But he didn't comment. He just held on, steady, certain, and helped her down. The entrance hall of Ashworth Hall opened before her like a cathedral. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, portraits of ancestors who all seemed to share Sebastian's uncompromising jawline. And assembled at the base of the grand staircase, 6 beautifully dressed women and 1 formidable dowager marchioness. "Sebastian," the dowager said. Her voice could have frosted glass. "Welcome home." "Mother." Sebastian kept Eleanor's hand tucked firmly in his arm. "Ladies, my fiancée, Miss Eleanor Graves." 6 pairs of eyes fixed on Eleanor. The hostility was immediate and varied. Ice from Rosalind, calculation from Cordelia, wounded bewilderment from Penelope, sharp assessment from Helena, cool disdain from Anne, and something complicated from Iris, who shared Eleanor's surname and apparently her family's talent for judgment. Lady Rosalind spoke first. Her voice was honey poured over glass. "Miss Graves, how unexpected. We'd all been so looking forward to getting to know the Marquess this summer. But you've rather changed those plans, haven't you?" Eleanor felt Sebastian tense beside her. She squeezed his arm. A signal. "I've got this." "I'm sorry to have disrupted your summer," Eleanor said, "though I hope we can still become friends." "Friends?" Miss Helena smiled like she was solving an equation. "How modern." "Indeed." Lady Cordelia stepped forward, all gentle concern and poisoned sweetness. "Especially when one is in such difficult circumstances. I heard about your late husband's debts." It must be such a relief to find security. The implication landed like a slap. Gold digger. Desperate. Grasping. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Before she could respond, Sebastian's hand covered hers. Warm. Deliberate. Unmistakable. "Eleanor's circumstances are irrelevant," he said. His voice carried the kind of cold authority that ended arguments before they started. She could be penniless or an heiress. "My feelings wouldn't change." "Of course not," the dowager interjected smoothly. "How could they, when you barely know her?" The blow was precise and devastating. Even Sebastian couldn't counter it without revealing the truth of their arrangement. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This was what the summer would be. Constant attacks, constant defense, a performance with no intermission. And she'd walked into it willingly. "I'm quite tired from the journey," Eleanor heard herself say. "Perhaps someone could show me to my rooms."
"I'll do it," Sebastian said immediately. "I want Eleanor to feel welcome here."
The dowager's expression could have cut diamond. "Sebastian, we have guests. Who can entertain themselves for an hour?" He was already guiding Eleanor toward the stairs. "Mother, I'm sure you remember what it's like to be new in a strange house. Some compassion, please." They climbed in silence. Eleanor didn't look back, but she felt 6 pairs of eyes burning into her spine like brands. "That was brutal," Sebastian said once they were out of earshot. "That was restrained," Eleanor corrected. "They were being polite." His laugh was short and surprised. "Then we're in for an interesting summer." He led her through corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity, past portraits and tapestries and doors that probably opened onto rooms she'd never see. Finally, he stopped before a carved oak door. "Your rooms," he said, pushing it open. Eleanor stepped inside and felt the air leave her lungs. The suite was beautiful. Cream and gold and soft blue. Tall windows overlooking gardens that seemed to dissolve into the horizon. A sitting room. A bedroom through an open door. A private dressing room beyond that. "It's too much," she whispered. "It's appropriate. These are the Marchioness's rooms." He moved to the windows. "Someday they'll belong to whoever actually holds that title. For now, they're yours." Eleanor joined him at the window. From here she could see the formal gardens, a lake glinting in the distance, green hills rolling toward the edge of the world. Beautiful and inescapable. "My rooms are in the East Wing," Sebastian continued, "connected by a private hallway, but you'll have your own entrance. No one comes in without your permission." "Including you?" "Especially me." He turned to face her. "I won't use that hallway without an invitation. Despite what this arrangement looks like, Eleanor, I'm not a monster." She studied his face, searching for the lie. She found exhaustion, loneliness, something guarded and bruised. "Why did you really propose this?" she asked. "Not the practical reasons, the real one." Sebastian was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was stripped of its usual authority. "Because I'm tired of being hunted. Because every woman my mother introduces looks at me and sees a title, a fortune, a breeding prospect. They don't see me." He paused. "And I've started to wonder if anyone ever will." The loneliness in his voice was staggering. Eleanor recognized it, the same ache she'd carried for months. The isolation of being constantly surrounded by people who looked at you and saw something other than what you were. "I see you," she said quietly. His eyes met hers. For a moment, the pretense fell away. The arrangement, the performance, the careful boundaries they'd drawn. Just 2 people who'd been made invisible by loss, suddenly visible to each other. A knock shattered the moment. A maid appeared with Eleanor's trunk. Her small, battered, painfully modest trunk, which looked absurd in these grand rooms. "I'll leave you to rest," Sebastian said, his composure already reassembling. "Dinner is at 8. Formal dress." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "I don't have—" "Your new wardrobe arrives tomorrow. Tonight, wear whatever you have. I don't care if it's black wool or cotton. You'll still be the most important person at that table." He left before she could respond. The door closed softly. Eleanor stood alone in her beautiful cage, listening to the silence of a house that didn't want her, and wondered what she'd agreed to. Then she straightened her spine, the way she'd been straightening it for 6 months, against whispers, against pity, against the slow erosion of everything she'd thought her life would be. She'd survived worse than 6 angry women and a disapproving mother-in-law. She'd survived James. She could survive this. Eleanor's only formal gown was 2 years old, slightly too large from months of skipped meals, and undeniably plain. She stood before the mirror in her borrowed rooms, tugging at the waistline, trying to will herself into someone who belonged in a marchioness's suite. She failed. A soft knock broke her spiraling. "Miss Graves, I'm here to help you dress." The maid who entered was young, maybe 20, with sharp eyes and steady hands. "I'm Annie, miss. His lordship assigned me to you personally." "Annie, I'm afraid my wardrobe is rather limited. We'll work with what we've got." Annie moved to the trunk with professional efficiency, then pulled out the black silk, the one good dress Thomas had bought Eleanor before everything collapsed. It was morning wear, technically, but Annie held it up to the candlelight and nodded. "In this light it reads sophisticated, not grieving. Trust me." Annie pinned Eleanor's dark hair into an elegant knot, adjusted the gown's fit with a few strategic tucks, and stepped back. "There, you look like you belong." Eleanor looked in the mirror. The black silk made her skin glow. The sapphire engagement ring, a family heirloom Sebastian had slipped onto her finger that morning, caught the light like a small blue fire. She looked like herself, but more, sharper, present. "I look terrified," she admitted. "Good," Annie said. "Better honest than fake. Now come on, his lordship doesn't like waiting." The walk to the dining room felt like walking toward a firing squad. Eleanor descended the grand staircase, hand trailing on cold marble, portraits of dead marchionesses staring down at her from every wall. The dining room doors stood open. The table could seat 30. Tonight it held 9. Sebastian at the head, the dowager at the far end, 6 women arranged between them like a jury, and one empty chair at Sebastian's right hand. Everyone looked up when Eleanor appeared in the doorway. She saw it all in a single breath. Lady Rosalind in ice blue silk, Lady Cordelia dripping diamonds, Miss Penelope in pink tulle like a confection, and Eleanor in her stark black, a crow landed among peacocks. Sebastian stood immediately, crossed the room in 3 strides, took her arm. "Eleanor, you look beautiful." He said it loud enough for the table to hear, loud enough that nobody could pretend they hadn't. He pulled out her chair himself, not a footman, him. "Ladies," the dowager said once they were seated, her voice smooth as polished ice, "shall we continue discussing the summer calendar?" "Of course, Your Grace." Lady Rosalind's smile was a weapon. "We were just discussing the garden party next week. Such a shame Miss Graves doesn't know anyone in the county. It must be so overwhelming for someone in her position." "I'm sure Eleanor will manage," Sebastian said. "She's remarkably resilient." "Resilience." Miss Helena tilted her head, calculating. "Such a practical quality, though not typically what one seeks in a marchioness." The first course arrived. Eleanor barely tasted the soup. Around her, conversation flowed with the smooth brutality of women who'd been trained since birth to destroy with a smile. "Tell us, Miss Graves," Lady Anne said, her tone dripping with false curiosity. "What are your accomplishments? Do you paint? Play the pianoforte?" "I read extensively," Eleanor said, "and I managed my late husband's household for 5 years." "Household management." Miss Iris, her supposed distant relation, repeated the words like they were quaint. "How rustic. Though I suppose when one marries a gentleman of limited means, practicality becomes a necessity." The message was clear. Eleanor had married beneath herself, and now she was climbing above herself. Both were equally suspicious. "Eleanor married for love," Sebastian said quietly, "an increasingly rare thing in our circles." "And yet here she is," Lady Cordelia observed, sweet as arsenic. "Engaged again so soon after her loss. One does wonder at the speed of such recovered affection." Eleanor felt the trap close around her. If she admitted to still grieving James, she was heartless for accepting a proposal. If she claimed to be over him, she was shallow. There was no right answer, so she chose the truth. "I wonder at it myself," she said. "Grief doesn't follow convenient schedules or social expectations. Sometimes healing comes from places you never expected." She felt Sebastian's attention sharpen beside her. That had been honest. Too honest, maybe. But the other women seemed momentarily thrown, as if her candor had disrupted their rehearsed attacks. The dowager recovered first. "How philosophical! Though one must wonder whether healing and love are truly the same thing." "Aren't they?" Eleanor said. "Don't we love the people who make us feel whole?" Sebastian's hand found hers under the table. A brief squeeze. Solidarity. "Eleanor makes me feel whole," he said simply. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The table went quiet. Because what he'd said, whether he meant it or not, carried the weight of something real. Miss Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "I hope you'll both be very happy." "Penelope," Lady Rosalind said sharply. But the crack had appeared. One of the 6 had broken ranks. Dinner ground on through 6 more courses, each one a new battlefield. Eleanor was interrogated about her family, dead. Her education, governess until 14, then self-taught. Her expectations as Marchioness. She said she hoped to learn from those more experienced, which was the diplomatic answer, but satisfied no one. By the time dessert arrived, Eleanor's face ached from the effort of maintaining composure. Her hand throbbed from Sebastian's periodic squeezes of support. "Perhaps we should take coffee in the drawing room," the dowager suggested. The drawing room was another exercise in intimidation. Silk sofas, priceless paintings, a pianoforte that probably cost more than Eleanor would earn in a lifetime. The 6 women arranged themselves like a court, leaving Eleanor isolated on a settee near the fireplace. Sebastian sat beside her without hesitation. "Comfortable?" he murmured. "I'd rather be anywhere else on earth." "That's the spirit." "Ladies," the dowager said, settling into her chair with the gravity of a monarch. "Perhaps Miss Graves would favor us with some music." Another test. Play badly and be mocked, or refuse and be called lacking. "I'm afraid I don't play," Eleanor said. "I was never taught." "Never taught?" Lady Rosalind's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "How extraordinary! It's such a basic accomplishment." "Eleanor's accomplishments lie elsewhere," Sebastian said, and his voice had turned cold enough to freeze the room. "Not everyone needs to perform like trained monkeys." Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. He'd just called his mother's carefully selected candidates performing animals. To their faces. In his own drawing room. The dowager's expression went rigid. "Sebastian, surely you don't mean—" "I mean exactly that." He stood, drawing Eleanor up with him. "It's been a long day. Eleanor and I are retiring." "It's barely 9 o'clock," Miss Helena protested, "and yet I find myself exhausted by the company." Sebastian's smile could have drawn blood. Imagine that. He led Eleanor from the room before anyone could recover. They walked in silence through the corridors, footsteps echoing on marble. Only when they reached the private hallway connecting their suites did he speak. "I'm sorry. That was worse than I anticipated." Eleanor laughed, a sharp, slightly unhinged sound. "Worse? Sebastian, they want me dead." "Metaphorically." "Definitely metaphorically. My mother draws the line at actual murder, probably." "You defended me." Eleanor's voice came out smaller than she intended. Nobody's done that in a long time. Something shifted in his expression. The mask slipped, just for a second, and underneath it she saw something that looked a lot like tenderness. "Get used to it," he said. "For the next few weeks, defending you is my primary job." They stood in the quiet hallway, the sounds of the house distant. Eleanor was aware of how close he was, how the lamplight softened the hard edges of his face. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For tonight. For all of it." "Don't thank me yet. That was just the opening move. It gets worse from here." How encouraging. His smile was genuine this time. "I'm starting to appreciate your sarcasm, Eleanor." "Good. I have years' worth stored up." He turned toward his rooms, then paused. "Tomorrow morning, I want to show you the estate, just us, before anyone else wakes and we have to perform again." "I'd like that." "Good." He hesitated. "And Eleanor, you did well tonight. Better than well. You were honest when they expected manipulation. It threw them off balance." He disappeared into his suite. The door closed softly. Eleanor stood alone in the hallway, her pulse racing for reasons she didn't want to examine too closely. One dinner survived. An entire summer to go. She woke to sunlight she didn't recognize. For a disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all crashed back. Ashworth Hall, Sebastian, 6 hostile women, and a dowager who could weaponize a glance. Annie arrived with the news that Sebastian requested her company for breakfast. Just the two of them. The other women wouldn't surface for hours. Eleanor dressed quickly in her only riding habit, dark green wool, slightly worn, and found Sebastian in the breakfast room, reading correspondence and drinking coffee. He looked different in morning light, less Marquis, more human. His hair was slightly messy, his jacket casual, his posture relaxed in a way she hadn't seen before. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression eased, like a knot loosening. "You're awake," he said. "I half expected you to barricade yourself in your rooms after last night." "Tempting." Eleanor fixed herself a plate. "But I didn't come here to hide." "No, you came here to fight." They ate in comfortable silence. No performance, no audience. Just two people sharing toast and coffee and the rare luxury of not pretending. "Tell me about James," Sebastian said. Eleanor's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Why?" "Because if we're going to be convincing, I need to understand who you were before, who you are now, and who shaped both those versions of you." It was sharper than she'd expected. Eleanor set down her fork. "James was beautiful," she said. "Charming. The kind of person who lit up every room he walked into. Everyone loved him. Including me, at first. At first. We married when I was 21. Too young, but I thought I knew what love was. The first year was good. He was attentive, kind. We laughed constantly." She paused. "And then his father died. James inherited debts nobody knew about. He started gambling, trying to win back what was lost. Started drinking. Started disappearing for days." "Did he hurt you?" The question was direct and carried an edge that surprised her. "Not physically," Eleanor said. "But there are other ways to hurt someone. You can make a person feel invisible, worthless, stupid for ever believing the promises." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "He didn't deserve you." "Maybe not, but I chose him. That's on me." "You were 21 and in love." "That's not a crime, Eleanor." Something cracked inside her chest. She'd blamed herself for so long, for not seeing the signs, for not stopping James's decline, for the shameful relief she'd felt when he died. The night he fell from his horse, she said quietly. He'd been drinking. We'd argued. I told him I was leaving, going to stay with my aunt. He rode off in a rage. She stopped. Everyone says it was an accident, but James knew those paths. He'd ridden them since childhood. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. That's not your fault, Sebastian said. Isn't it? If I'd been more patient, he'd still have been an alcoholic and a gambler who blamed everyone but himself. Sebastian's voice was fierce. You can't save people who refuse to be saved. Trust me. I've tried. There was a story behind those words, something old and painful. But before Eleanor could ask, Sebastian was already standing. Come, I want to show you something.
He led her to the stables where 2 horses waited, already saddled. They rode out through morning mist, leaving the house and its politics behind. The estate stretched for miles, ancient woods, rolling hills, tenant farms scattered across the landscape like something from another century. 3,000 acres, Sebastian said. 12 generations of my family. Sometimes I forget what it looks like to someone seeing it for the first time. It's beautiful, Eleanor said. And overwhelming. That's the appropriate response. They rode in comfortable silence, following a path through woods carpeted with bluebells. Eleanor felt something in her chest slowly unclenching. The constant tension of performance giving way to something quieter, easier. There's something I need to tell you, Sebastian said, about why my mother is so desperate to see me married. Eleanor waited. 5 years ago, I was engaged. Lady Vivian Ashford. Beautiful. Accomplished. Everything a marchioness should be. His voice was carefully controlled. The wedding was planned, invitations sent. 3 weeks before the ceremony, she ran away with my younger brother. Eleanor's breath caught. Sebastian. My brother Thomas was always the charming one, the fun one. I was too serious, too rigid, too much like my father. Vivienne chose passion over stability. His jaw was tight. Can't really blame her. Yes, you can. He glanced at her, surprised. You can blame her, Eleanor repeated. She made a choice that destroyed you. You're allowed to be angry about that. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Thomas died 2 years ago. Racing accident. Drunk. Showing off. Vivienne's been a widow ever since, and my mother's been matchmaking ever since. Terrified I'll die alone because my own brother stole my fiancée. The pieces clicked together. The fake engagement. The exhaustion. The walls he'd built so high that even he couldn't see over them anymore. This was a man who'd been taught by the people closest to him that love was a weapon, and vulnerability was just another word for target. I'm sorry, Eleanor said quietly. Don't be. It was a long time ago. 5 years isn't that long. Not for something like that. He looked at her. Really looked. And for a moment, the armor dropped. No, he admitted. It isn't. They reached a clearing where a small stone folly overlooked the valley. Sebastian dismounted and helped Eleanor down. His hands lingered at her waist, warm, steady, a beat longer than necessary. This is my favorite place on the estate, he said. I used to hide here as a child. Now I come here to think. About what? Everything. My father's expectations, Thomas's betrayal, the weight of a title I never wanted but can't put down. He leaned against the stone railing. And lately, how to survive my mother's campaign without losing what's left of my mind. Eleanor joined him at the railing. From here, Ashworth Hall looked small, manageable, almost harmless. I'm glad you brought me here, she said.
You're the first person I've ever shown this place." The admission hung between them, intimate, unexpected, and heavier than either of them was prepared for. Eleanor felt something shift, the careful boundaries of their arrangement blurring at the edges. "We should get back," Sebastian said abruptly, "before my mother sends a search party." They rode back in a different kind of silence. Not awkward, not tense. The silence of two people who'd started telling each other the truth and weren't sure yet what that meant. As they approached the stables, Eleanor saw the dowager waiting. Arms crossed, expression glacial. "Sebastian, how lovely that you could spare time for private rides while your guests sit abandoned." "They're your guests, Mother, not mine." "Nevertheless, they're here, and Miss Graves seems to be monopolizing your attention quite effectively." The dowager's gaze cut to Eleanor. "How convenient." "How intentional," Sebastian corrected. "Eleanor is my fiancée. She comes first." "First? Before duty? Before courtesy?" The dowager's voice went sharp. "Your father would be disappointed." Sebastian flinched. It was small, a tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible stiffening of his shoulders. But Eleanor saw it. And she saw the dowager see it too, knew the older woman had aimed for that exact wound and hit it perfectly. "My father is dead," Sebastian said flatly, "and I'm tired of living for ghosts." He walked away, left Eleanor standing alone with the one person in this house who frightened her most. The dowager studied her with the cold precision of a surgeon deciding where to cut. "You think you're clever, don't you? Catching a marquis with tears and vulnerability." Her voice was quiet, almost intimate. "But I know what you are, Miss Graves. You're a desperate widow, clinging to security. And when my son sees through you, and he will, you'll be cast aside exactly as you deserve." Eleanor felt anger rise, hot, clean, clarifying. Not the defensive shame she'd carried for months. Real anger. "You don't know anything about me, Your Grace." "I know enough." "No, you don't. But here's what I know about you." Eleanor held the dowager's gaze. "You're so afraid of losing Sebastian the way you lost Thomas that you'd rather control his life than trust him to live it. And that fear is pushing him away faster than I ever could." The dowager's expression flickered. For just a second, something human showed through. Shock, maybe. Or recognition. Then the mask returned. "Summer is long, Miss Graves, and there are 6 women in this house who would make far better matches than you ever will." She swept away. Eleanor stood in the stable yard, hands shaking, heart pounding, and realized she'd just declared war on the most powerful woman in the county. Annie materialized beside her. "Don't let her rattle you, miss." "Too late. Her Grace doesn't like anyone who threatens her control. And you, Miss Graves, you're the biggest threat she's faced in years." "How? I'm nobody." Annie looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You're making his lordship happy. That's the most dangerous thing you could possibly do." Eleanor watched the dowager disappear into the house, already gathering her forces. The battle lines were drawn, and somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the fear and the anger and the desperate awareness that she was completely outmatched, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in months. Fight. Not the instinct to survive. She'd been running on that for half a year. Something fiercer. The refusal to be erased. The stubborn, reckless insistence that she deserved to take up space in this world, in this house, in this impossible, beautiful lie she'd agreed to live. She straightened her spine one more time and walked back into the war.
The garden party arrived 5 days later, and Eleanor had learned exactly one thing about Ashworth Hall. The attacks never stopped. They just changed shape. 5 days of snide comments at breakfast. 5 days of pointed exclusions from afternoon activities. 5 days of Lady Rosalind finding new ways to remind Eleanor that she didn't belong, while Lady Cordelia smiled and gathered information, and Miss Helena calculated Eleanor's net worth out loud at tea like it was a parlor game. Sebastian defended her at every turn, but even he couldn't be everywhere. And the women were clever. They struck when he wasn't watching, in ways that left no evidence. A whispered insult in a corridor, a chair removed before Eleanor could sit, an invitation to croquet delivered to every woman in the house except her. Small cruelties, the kind that leave no bruise but bleed all the same. Now 200 guests were descending on Ashworth Hall for an afternoon of garden party elegance. And Eleanor stood in her rooms, wearing one of her new gowns, cream silk that Annie swore made her look regal, and feeling like a fraud about to be unmasked. "You look beautiful," Annie said firmly. "Stop pulling at your gloves." There will be 200 people down there. 200 people who've known Sebastian his whole life, who remember his engagement to Vivienne, who'll look at me and see... They'll see what his lordship wants them to see, and he'll make it very clear. Eleanor wasn't sure that would be enough. Not today. Because something else was gnawing at her. Something she'd overheard the previous afternoon that had turned her blood to ice. She'd been in the gardens, looking for a quiet bench and a few minutes without performance. Instead, she'd found Lady Rosalind and Miss Helena walking together behind the hedgerow, deep in conversation. They hadn't seen her.
"It's perfect," Rosalind had been saying. "If we arrange for them to be found together, the scandal forces the engagement to end."
"But how do we get Graves into her rooms?" Helena had asked. Eleanor had pressed herself against the hedge, barely breathing. Graves. George Graves. Her dead husband's brother. The man Sebastian had thrown out of her sister's wedding. "He arrives tomorrow for the midsummer ball," Rosalind had continued. "The Dowager invited him specifically. She thinks he can provide context about Eleanor's unsuitability. We just need to make sure he finds Eleanor alone at the right moment. And then he compromises her publicly enough that Sebastian has no choice but to break the engagement. A marquis can't marry a woman caught in a scandal with another man." Helena had hesitated. "That seems extreme." "It's necessary." Rosalind's voice had gone cold. "Eleanor doesn't belong here. She's common and desperate and beneath him. We're doing Sebastian a favor." They'd moved away. Eleanor had stood behind the hedge, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She'd tried to tell Sebastian 3 times, but he'd been locked in meetings with his steward all afternoon. At dinner, the Dowager had monopolized his attention so completely that Eleanor couldn't get a word in. And when she'd finally cornered him after the meal, he'd looked so bone-tired that she couldn't bring herself to add another weight to his shoulders. "Tomorrow," she'd told herself. "I'll tell him tomorrow." But tomorrow was now today. The garden party was in full swing, and somewhere among the arriving guests, George Graves was already here. Eleanor descended into the chaos. Sebastian found her immediately, as if he'd been tracking her movement from the moment she left her rooms. He looked devastating in his formal jacket, every inch the powerful lord. But when he saw her, his expression softened in a way that made her chest ache. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "Not even slightly."
"Honesty looks good on you."
He offered his arm. "Let's shock some people." The first hour was manageable. Sebastian introduced her to everyone with the same steady warmth. "My fiancée, Miss Eleanor Graves." And some responded with genuine kindness. Tenant farmers who shook her hand. Local merchants who welcomed her. Real people, not the gilded vipers inside the house. Eleanor was starting to breathe easier when the crowd shifted and Lady Vivian Ashford walked into the garden. Eleanor recognized her instantly, not because they'd met, but because every person in attendance turned to look. Vivian was stunning. Golden hair, flawless features, a pale blue gown that caught the light. She moved through the crowd like she expected the world to part for her. And it did. Sebastian's entire body went rigid. "Breathe," Eleanor whispered. He did. It looked like it cost him something. "I didn't know she'd be here," he said. "Your mother invited her." "Of course she did." Vivian approached with the confidence of a woman who'd never once doubted her welcome. "Sebastian, how lovely." "Vivian." His voice could have cracked glass. "And you must be Miss Graves." Vivian's smile was polite and completely hollow. How unexpected. Sebastian always did prefer elegance over, well. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The implication completed itself. Eleanor was the opposite of elegant. The obvious choice where Vivian had been the extraordinary one. "I prefer honesty over performance," Sebastian said, his hand tightening on Eleanor's arm. "Which is why I'm engaged to Eleanor." "Of course. How refreshingly modern." Vivian turned to Eleanor. "You're very fortunate, Miss Graves, though I imagine you know that, given your circumstances." Eleanor met her gaze. "I am fortunate. Sebastian is remarkable." She paused. "But I think you already knew that." Something raw flickered across Vivian's face. Regret, maybe. Or the ghost of a choice she couldn't undo. Then it vanished behind social armor. "Enjoy your summer," Vivian said sweetly. "Though I imagine playing a role so far above one's station must be exhausting." She drifted away before Eleanor could respond. Sebastian stood beside Eleanor, vibrating with tension. "Ignore her," he said. "Hard to do when she's right. I am playing a role above my station." "No." Sebastian turned to face her, his pale eyes fierce. "You're exactly where you should be. Vivian lost any right to judge when she chose my brother over me. Her opinion is worthless." But it wasn't worthless. Not to him. Eleanor could see the old wound reopening. 5 years of scar tissue tearing fresh. Vivian's presence had changed the air in the garden, made everything feel more fragile. The afternoon ground on. Eleanor endured introduction after introduction, smiled until her face ached, tried to ignore the 6 women circling like sharks, each taking their turn. Lady Rosalind cornered her near the refreshment table. "Such a lovely event. Though I couldn't help noticing you don't seem to know anyone here. How isolating." "Sebastian knows them. That's enough." "For now." Rosalind's smile sharpened. "But what happens when the novelty wears off? When he remembers what a real Marchioness looks like? Vivian is here after all. And old loves die hard." Miss Helena was more direct. "I've calculated it, Miss Graves. Your husband's debts totaled £3,000. His lordship's annual income exceeds £60,000. Quite the upgrade." "I don't think about Sebastian in terms of income." "How charmingly naive, though I suppose that act works on men." Each attack was small, surgical, designed to leave Eleanor feeling exposed and inadequate, without providing anything concrete enough to report. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. By late afternoon, Eleanor wanted nothing more than to hide in her rooms and not come out until autumn. But Sebastian found her. He always found her. "Walk with me," he said. They escaped to a quieter section of the garden. Eleanor felt some of the tension leave her shoulders the moment they were alone. "That bad?" Sebastian asked. "They're relentless. Every conversation is an ambush." "I know. I've been watching." His jaw was tight. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I thought bringing you here would protect you.
Instead, I've made you a target.
It's not your fault.
It is. I created this situation. I asked you to pretend, and you're paying the price." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "If this is too much, if you want to end the engagement and take the settlement now, I'll understand." Eleanor looked at him. Really looked. She saw the exhaustion around his eyes, the tension he carried in every muscle, the guilt that was eating him alive. He was offering her an escape, but he didn't want her to take it. And suddenly, neither did she.
"No," she said. "I'm not running. These women think I'm weak, that I'm here for your money. But I'm here because you asked me. Because I'm tired of being invisible and overlooked and told I don't belong."
Sebastian's expression shifted. Surprise first, then something warmer, something that looked dangerously close to admiration. "You're not invisible, Eleanor. Not to me."
"Then help me fight back. Not by defending me constantly, by teaching me how to navigate this world, how to be the fiancé they have to accept."
A slow smile crossed his face. "You want to go on the offensive."
"I want to survive."
"There's less difference than you think." He glanced back toward the party. Lesson 1. Stop trying to make them like you. They never will. Focus instead on the people who matter, the tenants, the servants, the people who actually keep this estate running. Win their loyalty, and the rest becomes noise.
What else?
Stop apologizing for existing. You're my fiancé. Own it. When Rosalind insults you, don't deflect. Agree with her and make it sound like a compliment. When Helena questions your motives, laugh like she's told a joke. Take their weapons and turn them into toys. Eleanor absorbed this. Then,
"And Vivian?"
Sebastian's expression went blank. "What about her?"
"She still affects you. Everyone can see it."
"She ran away with my brother. Of course she affects me."
"But you're not over it. And as long as that wound is open, she has power over you."
Sebastian was quiet for a long time. "How do you let go of something that changed who you are?"
"I don't know,"
Eleanor admitted.
"but holding on to it is killing you."
Before he could respond, Eleanor saw movement near the house. Guests streaming toward the ballroom. The garden party was shifting into the midsummer ball, and somewhere in that crowd, George Graves was waiting.
"Sebastian," she said urgently,
"There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said yesterday."
"What is it?"
"Sebastian!" Lady Rosalind appeared beside them, breathless and perfectly timed.
"Oh, Eleanor, I'm so sorry about that dreadful scene with Lady Vivian earlier. How humiliating for you."
The interruption was surgical. Eleanor clenched her jaw.
"I'm fine," she said. "Of course you are, though perhaps you should rest before the ball. I'd be happy to keep Sebastian company while you freshen up."
"Eleanor's staying," Sebastian said flatly. "We're going in together." Rosalind's mask cracked for half a second, frustration bleeding through, before the smile returned.
"Of course, though I did want to mention, I saw Mr. Graves earlier near the East Wing. Near Eleanor's rooms, actually. Isn't that peculiar?"
Eleanor's blood went cold. Near her rooms. Rosalind had said it casually, like an afterthought. But it wasn't casual. It was a signal. The trap was already set.
"Sebastian," Eleanor said, "I need to check my rooms. Now."
His eyes sharpened. "Why?"
"Please, just trust me."
They moved quickly through the corridors, leaving Rosalind behind. Eleanor's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her teeth. "Eleanor, what's going on?"
"Yesterday, I overheard Rosalind and Helena," she said, the words tumbling out. "They've been plotting with George.
They planned to get him into my rooms, to plant something, create a scandal, something that would force you to break the engagement." Sebastian's expression went from confused to murderous in the space of a heartbeat. "They what?" "The Dowager invited George specifically. Rosalind said, she said they needed to compromise me publicly, make it look like I was hiding something." They reached her suite. The door was ajar. Sebastian pushed it open and stopped. The sitting room had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, papers scattered across the floor,
And on her desk, placed carefully, deliberately, a letter in handwriting Eleanor had never seen before. Dated months ago. Signed, "Your devoted James." But James had never written Eleanor a letter. By the end, James could barely write his own name. Sebastian picked it up, read it once. His face went white, then dark red. "This is a forgery," he said. His voice was quiet and absolutely terrifying. "It's supposed to be from your husband, but the handwriting is wrong. The language is too formal. James was never formal. You told me that yourself. Someone fabricated this to make it look like you were hiding secret correspondence." "If I'd come up here alone," Eleanor said, her voice shaking, "if you weren't with me right now, they would have discovered it, demanded to know what I was concealing. It would have looked like I had something shameful to hide. Who else knows about this? No one. Not yet." Sebastian walked to the fireplace and threw the letter into the flames. They watched it burn, the forged words curling into ash, George's scheme dissolving into nothing. "Tomorrow," Sebastian said, "all 6 of those women leave Ashworth Hall. I don't care if my mother objects. I don't care if it creates a scandal. They attacked you in my house. That's unforgivable." "Sebastian, wait!" "No." He turned to face her, and the fury in his eyes made her step back. "I brought you here to protect you. Instead, I put you in danger. From my mother, from Vivian, from those women who smile at dinner and plot your destruction over tea. I'm done. Done with games. Done with performances. Done with letting anyone hurt you because I'm too worried about appearances." Something inside Eleanor's chest shifted. A wall she'd been bracing against suddenly had nothing pushing on the other side. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying this engagement doesn't end in 2 months." Sebastian crossed the room to her and took her hands. His grip was fierce. Almost desperate. "Marry me, Eleanor, for real. Not for convenience or protection or money. Marry me because these past weeks have been the best of my life. Because you make me laugh. Because you challenge me. Because I can't imagine going back to the emptiness I lived in before you." Eleanor's heart was beating so hard she could barely hear him over the roar of her own blood. This wasn't the plan. This was real and terrifying, and everything she'd been afraid to want. "You don't love me," she said. The words came out quiet, certain, and they landed on Sebastian like a blow. "I don't know what love is anymore," he admitted. "Vivian taught me that passion fades, that romance is a lie people tell themselves. But I know trust. I know respect. I know I'd rather build a life with someone I believe in than chase some fantasy of a love that doesn't exist." It should have been enough. A month ago, it would have been everything. But Eleanor heard what he wasn't saying. He was choosing safety. Choosing her because she was reliable, predictable, unlikely to destroy him the way Vivian had. She wasn't his first choice. She was his safest one. "That's not enough," she said, and pulled her hands free. Sebastian looked like she'd struck him. "Eleanor, you're proposing because you're angry, because those women tried to hurt me and you want to prove a point. But a real marriage needs more than protective fury, Sebastian. It needs..." "Needs what?" His voice cracked.
Tell me what I'm getting wrong. You're not getting anything wrong. You're just not in love with me. Eleanor's voice broke on the last word. And I think you're still in love with the ghost of Vivian Ashford. Not her, but the wound she left. You're so busy guarding that scar that you can't feel anything else. Sebastian flinched. Hard. Like she'd found the exact nerve he'd spent 5 years protecting. That's not fair. Isn't it? You told me yourself. You can't feel that way again. But that doesn't mean you've let her go. It means you're hiding. From feeling anything real. From risking anything that matters. And you're not hiding? The words came out sharp, wounded. You sold your furniture and your dignity piece by piece rather than ask anyone for help. You walked into this arrangement rather than admit you needed someone. Don't talk to me about hiding, Eleanor. The truth of it hit her like cold water. He was right. She was hiding too. Behind the arrangement, behind the performance, behind the safe label of fake that kept her from admitting what she actually felt. I already lived with a man who couldn't love me properly, she said quietly. I won't do it again, even if the cage is made of gold. She left, walked out of her ransacked rooms, past the scattered papers and the ashes in the fireplace, past Sebastian, standing alone with his hands empty and his face stripped of every defense he'd ever built. Behind her, she heard him say her name. Once, quietly. The way a man sounds when he realizes, too late, what he just let walk out the door. Eleanor kept walking. Down the corridor, past the portraits of his ancestors, through the house that had almost started to feel like hers. Her vision blurred. Her chest ached with something she refused to name. She'd done the right thing. She knew that. But doing the right thing had never hurt this much before. Eleanor didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling of a room that wasn't hers, in a house that didn't want her, replaying every word she'd said to Sebastian, and wondering if she'd just thrown away the only good thing that had happened to her in years. She'd been right. She knew that. A marriage built on fear wasn't a marriage. It was a fortress. And she'd already spent 5 years trapped inside one man's walls. She wouldn't do it again. But knowing she was right didn't stop the ache in her chest. Didn't stop her from hearing Sebastian's voice crack when he'd asked her what he was getting wrong. Didn't stop her from seeing his face, stripped, exposed, devastated, in the moment she'd walked away. She'd hurt him. The one person in this house who'd actually tried to protect her, and she'd taken his proposal and handed it back like it wasn't enough. Because it wasn't enough. But God, it had been close. Morning came gray and heavy. Eleanor dressed mechanically, not caring what she put on, and descended into a house that had turned itself inside out overnight. The 6 women were packing. Eleanor could hear them, raised voices behind closed doors, the clatter of trunks being dragged across floors, protests and accusations echoing through the corridors. Sebastian had kept his word. They were leaving. From behind the thick oak door of Sebastian's study came another voice, the dowager's, sharp and furious, muffled but unmistakable. Eleanor caught fragments as she passed. Reckless, ungrateful. Your father would never... She kept walking. The morning room was quiet. Eleanor pushed open the door, expecting emptiness. Instead, she found Vivian. Sebastian's former fiancée sat alone by the window, pale and still, her hands folded in her lap. She looked different from yesterday, smaller somehow. The confidence that had carried her through the garden party was gone, replaced by something fragile. "Miss Graves," Vivian said quietly, "may I speak with you?" Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. This woman had destroyed Sebastian, had chosen his brother over him, and left a wound so deep it had reshaped his entire capacity for love. But there was something in Vivian's eyes,
Not manipulation, not calculation, but genuine pain that made Eleanor pull out a chair.
Of course. Vivian took a breath, the kind that comes before a confession.
I owe you an apology and an explanation. You're entitled to neither, but I need to say it anyway.
Eleanor waited. 5 years ago, I was engaged to Sebastian. He was everything a woman should want. Honorable, kind, steady, devoted. Perfect. Vivian's voice was carefully controlled. But I didn't want perfect. I wanted fire. Thomas offered that. Reckless, consuming, dangerous. The kind of passion that burns through everything, including common sense. So you chose him. I chose him, and I destroyed Sebastian in the process. Vivian didn't flinch. I told myself he'd be fine, that he was too controlled, too rational to truly break. I was wrong. I shattered something in him that day, made him believe that love was a trap.
That opening his heart was just giving someone a weapon.
Eleanor's throat tightened. She thought of Sebastian's face last night, the desperation, the fear, the way he'd offered her partnership instead of passion, because passion was the thing that had nearly killed him. "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor asked. "Because last night I watched him defend you, really defend you, not out of obligation or duty, out of genuine feeling." Vivian leaned forward. "And I saw something I never saw when we were together. Sebastian letting someone matter, letting someone pass the walls." "He proposed last night," Eleanor said. She wasn't sure why she was telling Vivian this. Maybe because this woman was the only person alive who understood the specific way Sebastian was broken. Out of anger, out of protectiveness, not love. "Did he say he didn't love you?" "He said he didn't know what love was anymore, that he wanted partnership instead of passion, safety instead of risk." Vivian laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Of course he did, because admitting he loves you would mean admitting he's capable of being hurt again. It's easier to call it practical, easier to frame it as an arrangement, anything to avoid the terrifying truth. Which is what? That he's falling in love with you, maybe already has." Vivian's eyes were sad. "But he's so terrified of being abandoned again that he'll sabotage the whole thing rather than risk the vulnerability. He'll push you away and call it logic. He'll offer you everything except the one thing you actually need, his heart. Unless someone fights for him." Eleanor shook her head. "I can't fight for someone who won't meet me halfway. I already did that with James. Spent years trying to save a man who didn't want saving." "Sebastian isn't James." Vivian's voice went firm. "James was weak, self-destructive. He collapsed under the weight of his own failures. Sebastian is strong. Strong enough to survive what Thomas and I did to him. Strong enough to build walls so high he can't see over them anymore. That's not weakness. That's a wounded man protecting himself the only way he knows how." "And I'm supposed to be the one who tears down the walls? Why should that be my job?" "Because you already have." Vivian stood. "Eleanor, do you think Sebastian shows his favorite places to women he's conducting a business arrangement with? Do you think he defends someone he merely respects with the kind of fury I saw last night? Do you think a man who doesn't love you would look the way he looked when you walked out of that room?" Eleanor felt tears building behind her eyes. Hot, insistent. "What if I wait?" she whispered, "and he never changes? What if I give him my heart, and he breaks it because he's too afraid to hold it?" "Then you'll survive," Vivian said quietly. "Just like you survived James. Just like you survived poverty and scandal and walking into a house full of people who wanted you gone. You'll survive because that's what you do, Eleanor. She moved toward the door, then paused. But here's the question that should keep you up at night. What if you walk away? What if you leave the one man who actually sees you, who respects you, who would burn down his own world to keep you safe, and spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd stayed? Can you survive that? The question hung in the air like something with weight. Before Eleanor could answer, the door burst open. Sebastian stood in the doorway. His hair was wrecked. His cravat was missing entirely. He looked like a man who'd been fighting, not physically, but with something harder. Himself. "Eleanor, I need—" He stopped, saw Vivian. His expression went rigid. "What are you doing here?" "Helping," Vivian said simply. "Something I should have done years ago." She moved past him toward the door, then stopped at his shoulder, close enough to speak quietly. "Don't be an idiot, Sebastian. You know what you feel. Stop dressing it up in logic and say it. Before she leaves." She was gone before he could respond. Sebastian and Eleanor stood on opposite sides of the morning room, the distance between them feeling much wider than it was. "I talked to my mother," Sebastian said. His voice was rough, stripped raw. "Told her that if she ever manipulates my life again, ever, I'll cut her off completely. No more allowance, no more access, no more using my father's memory as a weapon." "Sebastian, the 6 women are gone. George Graves is banned from the county. I've made it clear to every person on this estate that you are to be treated with absolute respect. Anyone who has a problem with that can find employment elsewhere." "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly. "But that doesn't change what I said last night." "I know." He took a step closer, then stopped, like he'd hit an invisible wall. "Eleanor, I handled everything wrong. The proposal, the timing, the reasons. I was angry and scared, and I said every wrong thing a man could possibly say to a woman he—" He stopped again, swallowed hard. "A woman he what?" Eleanor asked. "Let me finish, please." His eyes were raw, open in a way she'd never seen. "When Thomas and Vivian ran away together, I made a decision. I decided that emotion was the enemy, that if I stayed controlled, rational, I'd never be hurt again. And it worked. I was perfectly protected." He paused. "And completely dead inside." Eleanor didn't move, didn't breathe. "Then you showed up at that wedding," Sebastian continued, "looking lost and furious and brave all at the same time. And something in me recognized something in you." "What?" "Someone who'd been broken but refused to stay broken. Someone who'd lost everything and was still fighting, still standing." His voice dropped. "You terrified me from the first moment, Eleanor, because you made me feel things I'd spent 5 years trying to bury." "What things?" "Anger. On your behalf, not my own. That was new. Pride when you stood up to my mother. When you didn't crumble under Rosalind's attacks." He took another step closer. "And something I didn't have a name for at first. This pull. Not just wanting to protect you. Wanting to know you. Every thought, every fear, every terrible joke. Wanting to be the person you turned to when the world got heavy." Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "Then why?" she asked. "Last night, why did you frame it as partnership? Why didn't you just say this?" "Because I'm a coward." The word came out flat, final, like he'd been rehearsing it all night and still hated the taste of it. "Because saying I'm falling in love with you means admitting you have the power to destroy me. And I've been destroyed before, Eleanor. It nearly killed me. The thought of going through that again, especially with you—" His voice broke. Actually broke. This man who commanded rooms and silenced crowds with a glance. His voice cracked on the word "you."
like it was the most dangerous word in the English language. "I could hurt you worse than Vivian ever did," Eleanor said quietly. "That's what you're saying." "Yes, because with Vivian, I was young. I was naive. I loved the idea of her more than the reality. But you," he shook his head, "you, I know. I've seen you exhausted and angry and scared and kind and stubborn and brilliant. I don't love an idea of you. I love you. The real, complicated, infuriating, magnificent you. And that means if you left, if you decided I wasn't enough, Sebastian, it would finish me, Eleanor. Not the way Vivian did, where I could wall it off and survive behind the stone. This would be the kind of thing I don't come back from. Sebastian. So yes, I called it partnership, because partnership felt survivable. Love feels like jumping off a cliff and trusting someone to catch you. And I haven't trusted anyone to catch me in 5 years. And I'm terrified, Eleanor. I'm absolutely terrified. Sebastian. She crossed the room. 3 steps. That's all it took to close the distance he'd been too afraid to cross himself. She reached for his hands. His fingers closed around hers, shaking, both of them shaking, and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. "I'm scared too," she said. "Scared of trusting someone again. Scared that if I let myself love you, I'll lose myself the way I lost myself with James. Scared of being the desperate widow who settled for security and called it happiness." "You're not settling." "I know. That's what I'm trying to tell you." She tightened her grip on his hands. "I've known for weeks how I felt. I just didn't think you could feel the same. Because you kept calling it practical. You kept framing it as arrangement, and I thought I was just the safe choice. The woman who'd definitely leave on schedule and not cause any trouble. You've caused me nothing but trouble since the moment I met you." His laugh was choked, wet. "You've ruined my entire system, Eleanor. 5 years of perfectly maintained emotional walls, and you dismantled them in 3 weeks without even trying." "Good." Eleanor stood on her toes, bringing her face close to his. "Because your system was terrible. You were miserable." "Completely miserable." "And lonely. Devastatingly lonely." "And you love me." "Desperately." The word came out raw, unguarded, the most honest thing she'd ever heard him say. "I love you desperately, Eleanor. Not safely, not practically. The kind of love that terrifies me, the kind I swore I'd never feel again." "Then stop being a coward," she whispered, "and kiss me." He did. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was 5 years of frozen walls cracking open all at once. Desperate and claiming, and so honest it hurt. Sebastian's hands came up to frame her face, his mouth on hers like he was trying to memorize the shape of her. And Eleanor gripped the front of his jacket and pulled him closer, pouring weeks of suppressed feeling into the space between them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, Sebastian's hands were trembling against her cheeks. "Marry me," he whispered. "For real this time. Because I love you. Because I can't imagine going back to who I was before you." "Yes." Eleanor's voice was steady, certain. "But on one condition." "Anything." "We do this slowly. We court properly. We learn each other without the performance, without the audience, without 6 women trying to destroy us. And if we still feel this way when summer ends, we marry. But Sebastian, I won't be a consolation prize. If we do this, it's because you choose me, not because you're afraid of being alone. I choose you." His voice was fierce,
No hesitation, no qualification. Over safety, over logic, over every rational reason to protect my heart. I choose you, Eleanor. Every time. She kissed him again. Softer. A promise instead of a claim. Behind them, someone cleared their throat. They broke apart to find the dowager standing in the doorway. Her expression was unreadable. Not the cold mask Eleanor had grown used to, but something more complicated. More human. "Mother," Sebastian said. The wariness in his voice was automatic, practiced. "I came to apologize." The words landed like a detonation. Sebastian went completely still. "To Eleanor," the dowager continued. Each word looked like it cost her something. "I've been unfair, unkind, cruel, if I'm being honest with myself, which I haven't been for some time." She stepped into the room. "I wanted to protect you, Sebastian. After Thomas, after everything, I convinced myself that finding you the right wife was the last duty I owed your father. That if I just controlled the process, I could keep you safe." "You can't control who I love, Mother." "No, I'm beginning to understand that." The dowager turned to Eleanor. "I spoke with Vivian this morning. She helped me see something I'd been refusing to look at. My grief, my fear of losing you the way I lost Thomas. I let it poison everything. I turned this house into a battleground and put you in the crossfire, Eleanor. That was unforgivable." Eleanor felt her throat close. She'd expected many things from the Dowager Marchioness. An apology was not one of them. "I'm not going to pretend I think you're what I would have chosen for my son," the Dowager said. "But I've watched him this past month. I've seen him laugh, really laugh, for the first time since his father died. I've seen him look at you the way his father used to look at me, like the rest of the world could burn and he wouldn't notice." Sebastian's arm tightened around Eleanor's waist. "That's worth more than pedigree," the Dowager said quietly. "More than accomplishments or connections or any of the things I thought mattered. So, if you'll accept it, I'd like to welcome you to this family. Properly." Eleanor blinked. The tears she'd been fighting all morning finally spilled. "Thank you, Your Grace. That means more than I can say." "Call me Margaret." The Dowager's, Margaret's, smile was small but genuine. "We're to be family. Might as well start as we mean to go on." She left them alone. The door clicked shut. Sebastian stared after her for a long moment, his expression dazed. Did my mother just apologize? Using emotions? Voluntarily? I think she did. Vivian must have performed an actual miracle. Eleanor laughed, giddy, relief-drunk, the sound of someone who'd been bracing for impact, and instead found solid ground. Or maybe she just reminded your mother what actually matters. Sebastian pulled her close again. Eleanor pressed her ear to his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Steady and strong and real. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I'm going to say it constantly now, multiple times a day, possibly to the point of annoyance. Fair warning." "I love you too." Eleanor tilted her head back to look at him. "Even though you proposed terribly. Twice." "I'll do it again. Properly, with moonlight and roses and whatever else romance requires." "I don't need moonlight." She pressed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. "I just need this. I just need you to keep being honest with me, even when it's terrifying." "Especially when it's terrifying," Sebastian agreed. He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her mouth, slow and gentle and full of a kind of tenderness that made Eleanor's knees weak. "So," she said when they finally pulled apart, "what happens now?" "Now we spend the rest of summer falling in love properly. No audience, no enemies, no performance."
He smiled, open, unguarded, the kind of smile she'd never seen on his face before. Just us. Just us, Eleanor echoed. And for the first time since she'd walked through the doors of Ashworth Hall, for the first time since James died, if she was honest, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to look forward to. Summer unfolded differently after that morning. The house emptied of enemies, and what remained was quieter, gentler. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm passes, and you realize you're still standing. Eleanor woke each day in her beautiful rooms and no longer felt like an imposter. She felt like someone learning, slowly, what it meant to belong. Sebastian courted her properly. Not the grand performative gestures of their fake engagement, but the small, honest ones that meant more. He brought her coffee in the library before anyone else was awake. He left books on her chair with pages marked at passages he thought she'd love. He asked her opinion on estate matters and actually listened to her answers, leaning forward with that focused intensity that used to intimidate her and now made her heart race for entirely different reasons. "You're good at this," he told her one morning after she'd spent an hour reviewing tenant contracts with his steward.
"Better than good. You see things I miss."
"I managed a failing household for 5 years, Sebastian. I know how to stretch a budget and spot a bad deal."
"I'm serious. The tenants trust you. Mrs. Hadley told me yesterday that you're the first person from the main house who's ever asked about her daughter's schooling."
"Her daughter is brilliant. She should be educated properly." Sebastian looked at her the way he'd started looking at her lately. Like she amazed him. Like every day, she did something that confirmed he'd made the right choice. "What?" Eleanor asked, self-conscious under that gaze. "Nothing. Just, you're going to be an extraordinary marchioness."
"I haven't agreed to be a marchioness yet. We're courting, remember? Slowly."
Painfully slowly. He caught her hand and kissed her knuckles. "I'm dying, Eleanor. Just so you know."
"You're dramatic."
"I'm in love. Same thing." The days settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than performed. Mornings were for riding. Their rides out to the stone folly had become sacred, the one place where no title or expectation followed them. They'd sit on the old wall overlooking the valley and talk about everything. About Eleanor's childhood, her father's early death, her mother's slow decline, the years of genteel poverty that had taught her to survive on pride and determination. About Sebastian's, the weight of his father's expectations, the rivalry with Thomas that had shaped both brothers in opposite ways, the loneliness of inheriting a world that everyone envied and nobody understood. "Did you love your brother?" Eleanor asked one afternoon. Before Vivienne. Sebastian was quiet for a long time. "I worshipped him. Thomas was everything I wasn't. Spontaneous, charming, free. He didn't carry the weight of the title. He could just live." He paused. "I think that's why I couldn't forgive him. Not for taking Vivienne. I could have survived that eventually. But for being so careless with something I would have given anything to have. Freedom. Joy. He had all of it, and he threw it away on drink and recklessness." "You have joy now," Eleanor said quietly. He looked at her. "I do. You gave me that." "No, you had it in you all along. You just needed someone to remind you it was safe to feel it." Sebastian pulled her close and kissed her temple. "When did you get so wise?" "Suffering. Highly recommended. Very educational." He laughed, the real laugh, the unguarded one that Eleanor had come to treasure because she knew how rare it was. How many years he'd gone without making that sound. Margaret. Eleanor still had to remind herself to use the dowager's first name.
became an unexpected ally as the weeks passed. Not warm, exactly. Margaret would never be warm the way Annie was warm, or the way the tenant farmers' wives were warm. But she was trying. And for a woman who'd spent 2 years building fortresses around her grief, trying was remarkable. She started joining them for breakfast, started asking Eleanor about her plans for the estate, started offering advice that was actually helpful rather than weaponized. "The Autumn Harvest Festival is important to the tenants," Margaret told Eleanor one evening. "Your father-in-law always attended personally. Sebastian has skipped it the past 2 years."
Eleanor glanced at Sebastian, who was pretending to read by the fire.
"Maybe this year we should go together."
"Maybe you should plan it," Margaret said.
"The Marchioness traditionally organizes it. If you're going to hold the title, you should start acting like it."
It was the first time Margaret had referred to Eleanor as the future Marchioness without a trace of bitterness. Eleanor felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness was a process, not a moment. But acceptance. The beginning of something that might, with enough time and patience, become family.
"I'd like that,"
Eleanor said. Margaret nodded once, brisk, satisfied. Then she stood and announced she was retiring, leaving them alone by the fire. "She likes you," Sebastian said, lowering his book.
"She tolerates me. There's a difference."
"For my mother, tolerance is the highest form of affection. Trust me, you're practically her favorite person."
"After you?"
"Oh no, she's furious with me. Has been for months. You're definitely ahead." Eleanor threw a cushion at him. He caught it, laughing, and pulled her down beside him on the sofa. They sat together in the firelight, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. And Eleanor thought, This is what I was afraid of. This ordinary, extraordinary closeness. This feeling of being exactly where I'm supposed to be. It was the most terrifying thing she'd ever experienced. And she wouldn't trade it for anything. Autumn came early that year. The leaves at Ashworth Hall turned gold and amber, and the air sharpened with the promise of winter. Eleanor planned the harvest festival with the same fierce competence she'd once used to keep James's household from collapsing. She met with every tenant family, organized food and music and children's games, negotiated with suppliers and settled disputes and earned the quiet respect of people who'd been skeptical of the outsider their Marquess had chosen. On the night of the festival, Sebastian found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, helping Mrs. Hadley arrange platters. "The Marchioness," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "does not usually work in the kitchen." "This Marchioness does." Eleanor blew a strand of hair out of her face. "Hand me that platter." "Eleanor." Something in his voice made her look up. He was watching her with an expression she'd seen growing over the past weeks. Wonder, mixed with a certainty so absolute it took her breath away. "Marry me," he said. Eleanor set down the platter. "You're proposing in the kitchen." "I'm proposing wherever you happen to be standing when I can't hold it in anymore, which is here, in the kitchen, with flour on your cheek." He crossed to her, took her hands, flour dusted and all, and held them against his chest. "I know we said we'd wait until summer ended. Summer's been over for 6 weeks, and I've been very patient, and I'm done being patient. Marry me, Eleanor, not because I'm afraid of being alone, not because it's practical, because I love you so much it's actually embarrassing, because you turned my house into a home and my life into something worth living, because every morning I wake up terrified that you'll realize you could do better, and every evening I go to sleep grateful that you haven't figured it out yet." Eleanor laughed. The sound was wet. Tears and joy tangled together in a way she'd stopped trying to separate. "You have flour on your jacket now," she said. "I don't care. And Mrs. Hadley is watching. I really don't care." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Yes,
I'll marry you. But Sebastian, no conditions this time. One condition, he groaned. Eleanor. I walked down the aisle alone. Her voice was steady, quiet, certain. Nobody gives me away. I give myself. I choose this, choose you, with my own 2 feet and my own free will. Not because I was rescued, not because I was desperate, because I love you and I want this life. I need that to be clear. To everyone. Sebastian's eyes went bright. He blinked hard, jaw working, and Eleanor realized she'd never seen him cry before. Hadn't known he could. Clear, he managed. Crystal clear. He kissed her, in the kitchen, with flour on both of them, and Mrs. Hadley quietly weeping into a dish towel, and the sounds of the harvest festival drifting through the windows. It wasn't moonlight and roses. It was better. It was real. The wedding was 6 weeks later, early winter, the small chapel at Ashworth Hall, cold outside and warm within, filled with the people who mattered. Not society, not titles and connections and carefully calculated guest lists. People. The Tennant families came in their Sunday best. Annie sat in the front row, crying before the music even started. Mrs. Hadley had baked the cake herself. Margaret sat straight-backed and dry-eyed. But Eleanor saw her grip the pew when the chapel doors opened, saw her knuckles go white, saw the single tear she wiped away when she thought no one was looking. Vivienne had sent a letter, brief, honest, and kind. I'm rebuilding somewhere new. I wish you both the happiness I was too foolish to recognize when I had it. Be brave, Eleanor. He's worth it. Eleanor stood at the chapel doors in a simple ivory gown, not the elaborate confection society expected of a marchioness's wedding, but something that felt like her. Annie had tucked white winter roses into her dark hair. The sapphire ring caught the light. Ready, miss? Annie whispered. More than ready. You look like a marchioness. I look like myself. That's enough. The doors opened. Music swelled, not grand or showy, but aching and beautiful. The kind of melody that catches in your throat. Eleanor walked down the aisle alone. Every step was deliberate. Every step was a choice. Not a woman being given away, but a woman giving herself freely and completely. She felt the weight of every eye in that chapel. The tenants who'd accepted her, the servants who'd become friends, Margaret who'd fought her and then fought for her. And at the altar, Sebastian. He looked different from the severe, guarded man who'd cornered her at a wedding and whispered pretend. His shoulders were softer, his expression open. His eyes locked on hers from the moment she appeared, and he didn't look away. Not once. When she reached him, he took her hands. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. That small gesture that had become their private language. I'm here. I see you. You're safe. You came, he whispered. Did you doubt it? Every second until now. His smile was crooked, vulnerable. I keep expecting you to realize you deserve better. Too late. I already signed the license. The ceremony was simple. Traditional vows, spoken in a chapel that had witnessed 300 years of marriages. But when Sebastian said, I do, his voice cracked. Not from nerves, from the sheer overwhelming weight of meaning it. And when Eleanor promised to love and cherish him, she felt every word settle into her bones like an anchor finding the ocean floor. Solid, permanent, home. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the rector smiled. You may kiss your bride, Lord Ashworth. Sebastian cupped her face in both hands. I love you, he said, loud, clear, for everyone to hear. Thank you for choosing me. Always, Eleanor said. The kiss was witnessed by tears and applause, and the sound of Mrs. Hadley's sobs echoing off stone walls. It was not a perfect kiss. Sebastian's hands were shaking, and Eleanor laughed against his mouth, and they bumped noses slightly. But it was the truest kiss either of them had ever known. At the wedding breakfast, Margaret stood to make a toast. She held her glass with steady hands and looked at her son and his bride with an expression that had traveled a long, hard road from hostility to something that looked remarkably like pride. "To the new Marquis and Marchioness of Ashworth," she said, "may they continue to remind us all that love, real love, is worth the risk." "To the risk," the guests echoed. Later, as they danced, their first dance as husband and wife, clumsy and laughing because neither of them was particularly graceful, Sebastian pulled Eleanor close. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously. Though I keep waiting for someone to pinch me. If this is a dream, I'm not waking up." His hand tightened on her waist. "Eleanor, I need you to know something." "That day at Lydia's wedding, when I walked up to you and asked you to pretend." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought I was looking for an escape, a way out of my mother's plans, a practical solution to a practical problem. And I was looking for you, I just didn't know it yet." Eleanor pressed her forehead against his shoulder, breathed him in. "We found each other," she said. "That's what matters." They swayed together while music and laughter filled the room. Outside, snow had begun to fall, the first of winter, soft and steady against the chapel windows. Eleanor thought of herself 7 months ago, sitting alone at her sister's wedding in a dress that didn't fit, invisible, overlooked, convinced she would never be chosen, never be seen, never be worthy of the kind of love that stays. She'd been wrong, not because a Marquess had rescued her. He hadn't. She'd rescued herself, by refusing to settle, by demanding honesty, by walking away from a proposal that offered her everything except the one thing she needed, by being brave enough to say, "This isn't enough," when every practical bone in her body screamed to take the deal and be grateful. Sebastian hadn't saved her. He'd seen her, and she'd been brave enough to be seen. That was the difference. That was everything. She looked up at her husband, this complicated, stubborn, formerly impossible man, who'd learned to open his heart because she'd refused to accept it locked. And she smiled. "What?" he asked. "Nothing. Just, I'm glad you found me at that wedding." "I'm glad you said yes. Both times. Eventually." "You proposed terribly both times. I was being generous." He laughed, kissed her forehead, pulled her closer. The snow kept falling. The music kept playing. And Eleanor Graves, Eleanor Hale now, Marchioness of Ashworth, but still and always herself, danced with the man she'd chosen in a house that had become her home, surrounded by people who'd become her family, carrying a heart that was full and unafraid. She was never unfit. She was never too damaged. She was never less than worthy. She had always been enough. And now, finally, completely, irreversibly, she believed it. Thank you for staying with Eleanor and Sebastian until the very end. If their story made you feel something, if it reminded you that you deserve to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved without conditions, then leave a like and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you the longest. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next story. And remember, another beautiful journey is waiting for you right now. Click and keep going. Thank you for being here.